Nice day outside, isn't it? While I should have saved this book for spring, I really wanted to read it for this month. The Secret Garden was written by Francis Hodgson Burnett and published in 1911. While it is considered fiction, it's a type of fiction that I would classify as magical realism. Why? Well, I'll go over this in more detail in the analysis, but there appears to be a few magical elements to this story. The story itself takes place in the early 1900s, likely around the same time this book was published. I actually performed in a ballet production of The Secret Garden 13 years ago. That was the last year I did ballet, so the story has a special place in my heart. Also, I should clarify, this was only a production that my ballet school put together. It was still pretty great. I actually didn't read the book itself until college when I took a children's literature class. Anyways, the story begins in British India. Mary Lennox is born to wealthy British parents, but is clearly unwanted. Mary is left to the care of native servants. Mary is always allowed to have her way since her mother doesn't want to be disturbed. Because of this, Mary becomes quite spoiled and unhappy all the time. Soon, the cholera epidemic kills Mary's parents and most of the servants. The servants who survive leave the house without Mary. She is left alone in the nursery. Eventually, British soldiers find her and put her in the temporary care of a clergyman. She doesn't get along well with him nor his children. The children soon tease her by calling her Mistress Mary quite contrary. Mary is later sent to England to live in her uncle's manor, Misselthwaite, which is located in the Yorkshire moors. Mr. Archibald Craven is not at home when Mary arrives at Misselthwaite. She learns from the housekeeper, Mrs. Medlock, that Mr. Craven hasn't been the same since his wife Lilias died. At first, Mary hates her situation and everyone in the house. That is, until she starts to spend some time outside and tries to get to know the people in the house. She soon befriends Martha Sowerby, her maid. Martha tells her stories about her home life and her many siblings. She also tells Mary about the garden that Lilias kept. After Lilias died in an accident in the garden, Mr. Craven shut up the door and buried the key. Mary, being a curious child, wants to see if she can find that garden. As Mary continues to explore the property, she soon befriends one of the gardeners, Ben Weatherstaff, and a robin. Mary is hoping to find the secret garden. The robin lives there, so she knows where it is, but she can't find the door. One day, she hears these cries in the house. Martha insists it's just the wind, but Mary thinks it's something else. Even on a rainy day when she explores the house, she can't find the source of the cries. One day, while Mary is exploring the gardens, the robin leads her to an area of disturbed soil. She looks at it rather closely and discovers the key to the garden! Now all she needs to find is the door. Luckily, it isn't too far away. As she looks along the garden wall, there it is! The key fits and the secret garden is open. Most of the plants look near dead, and Mary doesn't know a whole lot about gardening. She knows that Martha's brother Dickon knows quite a bit about gardening. Mary asks Martha to have Dickon bring over some gardening tools. Dickon comes with the tools, and the two work on the garden together. Now, Dickon is very attached to the moors and the animals around him. He not only teaches Mary about gardening, but he also teaches her about the animals. One night, Mary hears those cries again, and decides to go find the source. Eventually, she finds the source of the cries are coming from her cousin, Colin. She was never told about Colin, and Colin was never told about her. Colin is said to have a spinal condition along with being prone to fevers, so he can't leave his bed. While a doctor has said that he needs fresh air, he doesn't want to go outside. The servants do whatever Colin wants, otherwise he will throw massive temper tantrums. So, he too was spoiled like Mary. Over the weeks, Mary visits Colin often and tells him stories of her time in India, along with stories about Dickon and his home. Mary mentions the garden, but doesn't reveal it yet. One day, Colin and Mary get into a huge fight. Eventually, Mary is called into the room, and she basically yells at Colin that he has nothing to be afraid of. This is just what he needed to snap back to reality and start to understand people a little better. After a few more weeks, Mary reveals to Colin that she knows where the secret garden is. A few days later, after Dickon visits, they take Colin to the secret garden in his wheelchair. While they're playing there, Ben Weatherstaff happens to find them. It turns out that Ben Weatherstaff has been looking after the garden for a long time, but eventually stopped since he was too old to climb over the garden wall. The children swear him to secrecy. Ben Weatherstaff points out that he thought Colin was crippled, and Colin, being angry at that statement, stands up. There was actually nothing wrong with his legs, he's just been afraid to use them. His legs are weak now due to disuse, but as the children continue to visit the garden, Colin grows stronger. Colin wants to keep his restored health a secret from everyone until his father gets home, so he and Mary have to pretend he's still sick. While Mr. Craven has been traveling, he starts getting dreams of Lilias in the garden. He receives a letter from Mrs. Sowerby, Dickon's mother, who has also seen the garden and Colin's restored health. In the letter, Mrs. Sowerby asks Mr. Craven to come back to Misselthwaite. When Mr. Craven gets home, he goes outside to the garden and runs into Colin. Colin and Mary were racing in the garden, and Colin won, running right into his father's arms. The children tell Mr. Craven their story about the garden and how Colin got better. The book ends with Mr. Craven and Colin walking back to the manor. The staff see them and are very stunned to see Colin walking. Well, let's analyze. As I've mentioned at the beginning, I consider this to be more magical realism. A Robin leads Mary to the key, Mr. Craven is having these odd dreams about his dead wife, and Mary also believed for a while that Dickon was a wood fairy. Magic is actually mentioned quite a bit near the end of the book. Colin believes that positive magic is what made him get well. That may be true, but it could also be that his mindset has changed after being convinced multiple times by Mary and Dickon that he's going to live. Actually, let's talk about Colin for a minute. Colin had been told his whole life that he was going to die, and he was going to be crippled. It is not until he meets Mary and starts to enjoy life as much as she does that he gets the determination to keep living. Mary was put in a similar situation as well. While she wasn't told all the time that she was going to die, she was unwanted and didn't want to go outside. It wasn't until she spent time completely alone that she started to understand and empathize with people. Colin went through a similar change when Mary both yelled at him and when she told him that he should be kinder to others. Now, I haven't talked a whole lot about Dickon. That's because I feel it's better to discuss him here. I want to look at the difference between Colin and Dickon. Dickon enjoys the outdoors and the animals. He does his best to be kind to others and show them the joys of nature. Whereas when Mary first met Colin, he was much like she was when she was in India. He was rude, spoiled, and wanted nothing to do with the outside. He was too caught up in his fears. Eventually, it was Dickon himself who helped Colin along his path to health. At the end of the book, there's a really important emphasis on focus. Mr. Craven was always focused on the fact that his wife was dead and that Colin might not live. He let the negative thoughts overwhelm him for 10 years. It isn't until those dreams and his time spent outdoors while traveling that he realizes that he shouldn't focus on such things. Colin, of course, had a similar experience, but in his case, he called it magic. Maybe there was a little magic involved. Who knows? Overall, this is a really sweet story. I love reading this. While it is nice and simple, it contains some very important lessons that children need to learn. I'd recommend this book for ages 10 and up. It's a great way to get kids to start reading. Besides, simpler stories are very helpful for young readers. Now, this book has had many adaptations over the years. There was a silent film adaptation made in 1919 that is sadly believed to be lost. There were also film adaptations released in 1949, 1993, 2017, and 2020. There were also a few TV series adaptations, along with several stage plays and a radio drama adaptation. There was an anime adaptation as well, but sadly it's not available in English. I've seen the 1993 film. I think it's fine. I feel like this is one of those books that's a bit easier to adapt, but I can understand that some liberties might need to be taken to make things more interesting. It's nice to sit down and read this again. I strongly recommend reading this. While it may seem a little dull from the premise, the story is actually quite beautiful. I hope I can read it again sometime. I hope you'll get to enjoy this as much as I do. Happy reading!